Good morning, everyone. I'm Courtney Johnson with the Purchasing Division. Welcome to today's session on forms and documentation presented by buyer Dusty Smith. It's scheduled to last an hour. We do have some of our staff in our room with our presenter today, so you may be hearing from them if they have additional information to offer. For this session, there is a PowerPoint that you can print out if you haven't already and use that for future reference, but she is mainly going to just be on our website showing you individual forms. So there won't really be a PowerPoint to follow along for this one, but again, you can print it out for your reference. If you did not log in with your first and last name, please log out and back in order to receive credit. If you have multiple people in your agency viewing from a single computer, please send us a sign-in sheet to purchasing.training@wv.gov. Everybody attending today will receive a certificate from CourseMill, but we have to pull attendance reports from WebEx to confirm participation, so please give us a couple weeks before calling to ask about your certificates. For today's presentation, we will be answering questions throughout, so please, when you think of something, go ahead and put your questions in the chat window and send to the host. Let's get started with Dusty.
Good morning, everyone. This is the purchasing website. When you come down about halfway down the page, on the left-hand side, there's forms. And all the forms that you should need will be here. But I already downloaded the ones that I need for today. I'm going to start off with the terms and conditions for purchasing. Under the instructions of bidders, the following will need to be filled out. Whether or not you're going to have a pre-bid meeting. For my agencies, if they're going to do a pre-bid, I ask them to put out for 1.5 weeks from the time that the CRQS is submitted to me. That way I can, in case there's any issues with the solicitations that we had to go back and forth, we should have time to still do the same date that you had from the beginning. And the best times to do a pre-bid meeting is Tuesdays through Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Mondays, people forget about what they need to be there for. Fridays, everybody's in a hurry to get out of the door. Make sure you use the sign-in sheet. We have one on in our handbook that you can use, and just make sure you fill out the solicitation number, the date and the location of the meeting for everybody to sign. Ask your vendors if they can give you the business card. That way you have from this represented the person's name, the address, and phone number, fax number, email. Just so everything is there, we know who was there. And only one person can represent one company at a time. You cannot have more than one. You cannot have one person represent multiple agency or companies. Your buyer will fill out the this information here, which is the sealed bid, the buyer, the solicitation number, fax numbers, that kind of stuff. The buyer will fill that out. When you go to the general terms and conditions, you need to fill out whether it's a term contract, how many renewals you'll need if this is a open end, whether you want a fixed period contract, a one-time purchase. Those are things that you need to fill out before you send it to us. Then you go to the quantities. Quantities is whether you want it to be open end, a service, a combined service and goods, or a one-time purchase. Having these things filled out makes it easier, so we don't have to go back and forth with you to get the correct answers. For required documents, you need to if you're having a construction contract, you have to have bid bonds, performance bonds, labor material bonds, and if it's for a roof, you need to have a maintenance bond. And interestingly enough, if you have an HVAC system on the roof, you have to have a maintenance bond because it could affect they could damage the roof. So you need to make sure you have maintenance bond for HVAC as well. Licenses and certifications and permits. This would be for your West Virginia contractor's license, your elevator's license, your HVAC license, your electrician's license, your plumbing license. Do not make sure you know what you need, because don't ask for a plumbing license when all you need is an HVAC license, or electrician's license when all you need is an HVAC license. That can makes it harder to award the contract because the vendor may not have those licenses, and then you have to start all over or go to another vendor. But yeah, insurance wise, generally we use the commercial general liability insurance for $1 million, automobile liability insurance for $1 million. I have used and seen the professional malpractice error and omissions insurance for at least $1 million, and cyber secure liability insurance for like $5 million per occurrence. You would need to contact Brim to see what insurances you need to have for the solicitations you're wanting to put out. With the new revised version of the terms and conditions, we now they have updated the liquidated damages. So you have where you fill it out on the terms and conditions, or it says the liquidated damages are contained in the specifications, or there's liquidated damages are not included in this contract. Please select one of the three. It makes it easier for the vendors to understand. And that is it for the general terms and conditions. However, there's additional terms and conditions, and this is for construction contracts only. You do not need to send this to your buyer if you're not having a construction contract. But on the construction contracts, make sure you fill out the Davis and Bacon. This is for prevailing wage rates for the labor, the unions. So that is important because they will send you questions after questions after questions. The subcontractors list submission is generally filled out when the bidders send in their bids. Then you have the additional terms and conditions, which is agricultural and engineering contracts only. Only send this in if you're doing architectural and engineering contracts only. Sorry, I know I said agricultural. Messed that word up. When the vendors send in their bids, sometimes they do not sign these pages, and we have to send them back to them and ask them to sign if it is the winning or the selected awarded vendor. Now we're going to go on to the purchasing affidavit. The purchasing affidavit we use from the code 5A310 and the code 522.1I. This is required for all purchases under the code and is used to certify that the bidders do not owe any debts to the state. One of the problems that we do have is the the vendors will give the date here, they'll sign the date here, and then it's supposed to be taken and sworn to before this, the notary on the same date. Probably several times a week, we have where the vendors will have different dates, and we have to send it back to get a new date on it. We do accept the seal and the stamp. If it's a seal, please use charcoal or a pencil and lightly go over it so we can see the seal. Otherwise, sometimes it doesn't scan through. And when it comes to renewals for a CMA or any other kind of renewal, I ask my agencies to forward me the purchasing affidavit in an email since it's not needed in the header. So I'm going to go on to the Agreement Addendum, the WV-96. In 2021, the legislature passed a law that would avoid certain clauses if found in contracts. There are 18 items contained in the law. If you'd like to see what those clauses are, you can look them up in the West Virginia Code 5A362. In many cases, the new law will take the place of using the WV-96 Agreement Addendum, and if not, however, pertain to privacy or security reasons, the agencies will now need to check for those. We'll still need to check for those. But with the new terms and conditions, it has helped that we don't need to do the 96 as much. But in the 96, make sure you fill out the agency's name, the vendor's name, the contract lease number, which would be like the CRFQ or the ARFQ that you would need, and the commodity service that you're using. Make sure the vendor does not check through things and write new items in, because they have done that in the past. The vendor is the one who needs to sign first, and then the agency would sign second, and you would send it on to us at purchasing. Going to the drug-free workplace conformance affidavit. This is a relatively new version. We got it redone. It was redone in 2020. This is for code 21-1D. This is required for all construction contracts, and the vendor does not submit this, it could result in disqualification for the bid. This does not have to be submitted with a bid. However, it is required upon request. The vendor should complete the workplace report cover sheet and submit no later than 1 year or upon completion of the project per West Virginia Code 21-1D 2B. And with the cover sheet, we also have, well, I'm sorry, the affidavit, we also have the cover sheet, which is right here. We just put those with our construction contracts. The agencies generally do not need to deal with those. We just attach it ourselves. Now we're on to the direct award posting, which is the WV-65. This is for Code of State Rules 148-1-7.5. This is replacing the West Virginia, the sole source consideration form and the sole source determination form. Agency would fill out the agency, procurement officer, and the date of request. Make sure you fill out, make sure you specify the description of the commodity and service that you're wanting to get. If it's sole source, even whether it is sole source or sole source as a software as a sole source or software as a service, make sure you fill out yes or no. Your justification showing that the direct award is in the best interest of the state. The agencies really need to fill this out with a lot of specificity. That word, sorry, be specific and very detailed. Under basis for direct award, you need to fill out either the competition is not available from any source or whether no other source would be willing or able to replace the existing source without a detrimental effect on the spending unit. If you chose that there's no other source, then you need to show the purchasing agency how you looked to find. Did you Google it? Did you talk to other vendors? Did you talk to other state agencies to see what they do for what you're needing to do? And also be specific in the detrimental effect if you're choosing that it's going to be a detrimental effect to the spending unit. For number 4, the time period which the delivery must be made or performance must occur. Make sure you fill that information in, the price, and also you need to include the vendor quote. Any limitations that a competing vendor would need to satisfy. You need to fill this in because what if when it's put out for advertisement and another vendor comes in and says, hey, I can do this, and you don't have, and as an agency, you didn't put in any limitations, then that vendor would definitely be able to, and you have to put it out to bid with everybody again. These are put out to bid for a minimum of 10 days. When you submit it to your buyer, please provide the quote from the vendor, the OT approval if it is electronically related, or any other approvals that could be needed. The terms and conditions would need to be signed and the purchasing affidavit, but those can be done during the 10 days of advertisement. And it is also a good time, that would be a good time to make sure the vendor is compliant with all the agencies required. The agency purchase officer would sign, and then it was be sent to your buyer, and your buyer would get the signatures from either the purchasing director or the designee. If you're doing one for under the 25,000, then it would be the agency procurement officer would sign in both places. Unless your procedures require somebody else to sign. But generally it'd be the procurement officer. The multiple award determination, the WV-70, this is for code 5A311C and code of state rule 148.1.7.9. This form is used to request purchasing division's prior approval to award a contract to multiple vendors. However, the agencies need to send this in whenever they send in their CRQS or this, that would be it, the CRQS or the CRQM. You can't ask for it after the fact because it really needs to be in your specifications that says you're going to be awarding to more than one vendor. And yeah, because the base of the award has to be in the specifications. And the reason would be due to the region, the location, or the type of work that's needed, such as like the salt or the stone and agriculture, stone and aggregate. You have different vendors across the state that may not be able to, you have some, like you'd have a vendor in the eastern region and you need it in the west. So the vendor from the eastern region may not be able to deliver to the person in the west. However, but a person, so they would have different regional contracts. For the WV68, the Section 9 equitability opinion request form. This is for the 5A310 and the Code of State Rules 148.1.4. This is if you're wanting to ask to have another commodity on the Section 9 and impossible to bid form. Impossible to bid, not form, but list. Sorry, list. You would fill it out and give us the reasons why you think that this should be listed on the impossible to bid list, and send it to your buyer, and your buyer will take it up the chain to see what other agencies or what the purchasing division and management would decide. Non-conflict of interest forms, these need to be filled out by every evaluator who looks at the solicitation. By signing the evaluators are attested that they have not or will not have any conflict of interest with the participating vendors. When it comes to the RFPs, they are to sign it the day that the bid opens for the technical questions. That way, because you don't always know who is, with the RFPs, you do not always know who the vendors are even going to be looking at it. The same way with the EOIs. You have to do that with the EOIs and the RFPs. With the RFQs and other ones, it just needs to be submitted with the award to the purchasing division. We need those for any purchases exceeding $2,500, and your agencies may adopt it for less than $2,500, but purchasing needs it for anything over $25,000. No, purchasing needs it for 20. Yeah, sorry. Just need the name, title, agency, signature, and date. RFQ the RFP forms were revised in July of 2019. The other one didn't do that. Okay. We have, I think it looks a lot easier to fill out now versus how it was prior to 2019. Just fill it out and you submit it to your buyer, and the buyer will take it up for approval or denial. Have the WV 110, the WV 111, and the WV 113. And there's also a WV 112, which is for the Technical Evaluation Committee scoring. There's also a RIP scoring sheet, which I think makes it a lot easier to fill out as well. And they have examples to explain what needs to go where. There are 12 templates that are maintained in the purchasing website. There's a specification, standardization. We have yet to have anybody I don't think we've had anybody do a standardization yet. Love to see one happen. And it would be an interesting solicitation, I think. Does anybody have any forms that they want me to go over? Please put it in this chat window. I'm going to go over the vendor bid quote summary. This is for the verbal bids that are less than 10,000. Make sure you fill out the agency, who the quote, the vendor's name, and the quotes were received by, and what each item is. And you do that for each vendor that you are calling to ask about. So like this one here, you have three, you can put in 3 vendors here. You fill out the number, the person who provided the bid, the shipping date, the terms, and the date of the bid response that you called them. And fill everything out. This will be great. You need this for whenever you get audited, and you'll have it in your file. Makes everything so much easier if you have everything in your file. This is for software maintenance and support. And I believe didn't this one have for 5 years now? See it. So maybe not. Do you remember? So software maintenance, was it for 5? Okay. For software maintenance, you can do those for 5 years, which makes it easier for your employees if you have something for 5 years versus every year you have to redo it.
We do have a question. I just did a kickoff meeting and filled out a WV 90 for a contract that just started. We do not need to turn this into purchasing unless contract exceeds 1 million. That's this question. Can you give us a little more information on the contract? Can you give us a little more info on that?
Yeah, it does say.
The contract is for a medical director, attending physician. Asking, just confirming that he does not need to turn that into purchasing unless the contract exceeds $1 million. Yeah. We'll get back to you on that one.
On agency terms and conditions, I'll do a quick through on this one. Theirs is a little bit different than the purchasing terms. You still have the mandatory pre-bid meeting and or pre-bid will not be held prior to bid opening. But as the buyer for the agency, the agency's procurement officer would need to fill out the sealed bid, the buyer, the solicitation number, which would be the ARFQ or the ASSD, the bidding time, and the opening time. The opening time should not be 1:30, and it shouldn't always be on the half hour due to Oasis not syncing except for on the half hours. In the past, prior to me being at purchasing, I know of people that put it in for like 2 o'clock in the morning, and then they didn't understand how come it didn't open when they thought it should open. So make sure, and also you're using military time when you're doing this, so it'd be like 2 o'clock, 2:30 would be 14:30 versus 2:30. Fill in your fax number. If you do not have a fax number for your agency to receive bids, then you just put in NA. And everything else will be the same as the ones with purchasing, other than the fact that you cannot do bid bonds. However, performance bonds and labor and materials and maintenance are all, you're able to use those. Make sure you fill out your stuff for the licenses, certifications, and permits. And again, with your insurance. And liquidated damages are there as well. Make sure you fill those out in the areas that are needed. Okay. Let's just go look at it. Okay. We're going to go look at in the handbook to 6.5 to look up the contract management. We would encourage you to bookmark the handbook on your computer so that you can look up anything as needed. Contracts $1 million or less. Procedures. Establishing payment benchmarks to assure the state receives value prior to remitting payment. Conducting regular meetings between spending unit and vendor to assess contract performance. Training spending unit personnel to manage contracts, or using the Office of Technology's project manager for all projects. This is for contracts under $1 million or less. These are the responsibility of the agency. It's best to bookmark the purchasing handbook, the forms page, and other things that you may be needing to find. Makes things easier.
Any other forms you want us to go over, just let us know in the chat.
The vendor preference page, these are only needed for equipment and purchases now. Isn't that correct? These are for motor vehicles and equipment used for highway maintenance. They're not used, this form is not used as much anymore. This is the direct award posting for the 2,500 and 1 penny to 25,000. It's filled out pretty much the same way as the direct award for purchasing. It's just the agency procurement officer would be signing in both places. You really need to be specific in what you need and where and what your where you identify your sources from. It's not used anymore. We don't use. I'll show you the checklist from the handbook. In the handbook, if you go down to Exhibit E, which has agency processed checklists, there's checklists for request for requisitions, the change orders, the direct award, the delivery orders, the emergency purchase, pretty much all the checklists that would be needed for you to send to us. Let's go over the first one, which is request for quotation.
Before we get into those, we do have a question. Related to 5A-3-62, in order for this to be used, doesn't the agency need to provide the vendor with the terms and conditions regardless of expense? It mostly happens with software and tech purchases. Okay, I'll repeat again. Related to 5A-362, in order for this to be used, doesn't the agency need to provide the vendor with the terms and conditions regardless of expense. It mostly happens with software and tech purchases. Is there a specific form you're asking about?
Yeah. Yeah, because
That would determine, depend on the vendor's terms. We would need to get the terms from the vendor. The 96 doesn't. It doesn't kick in until they submit ultimate terms and conditions. Alternates are.
the documents required from the agency for RFQ. You'd submit the CRQS or CRQM with the match, make sure you fill out the maximum budget amount and the master terms and conditions. Several times we had to send things back because we do not receive the maximum budget amount. The specifications and suggested vendor list. Please provide 3 vendors with names and emails. Address is not as important anymore because the emails is where we send out the bids. We do not send out hard copies in the mail anymore. And there's also, you can go to, there's a business intelligence report that gives you a list of vendors for per commodity. You can, is that out there? Just tell them how to get to it, or do they have to ask for us? You would have to log into My Apps. If you have business intelligence, you should be able to find that report. If not, please email the help desk. Make sure you have your pre-approvals, such as Attorney General's, Office of Technology, Capitol Building Commission, surplus, and statewide interoperability executive committee. During the bid process, there would be, sometimes there are addendums, which would be to provide the pre-bid or questions to answer, questions from the vendors. So we would submit the responses. So make sure you get those back as soon as you get them from your buyer. For the award process, you need to send a letter that should state that the lowest responsible bidder that meets specifications. If you have disqualifications from the vendors that are lower price, you need to spell out per what specification is the reason that vendor did not meet the qualifications. If you have to have a second OT approval, you have to send that in as well. Purchasing affidavit will be signed, we will get from the successful vendor. And we always have to make sure we check with Secretary of State's for make sure they're in compliance and with good standing with OASIS for the state and insurance commission and the federal and state department and workers' comp. Make sure you send in the non-conflict form, AIA documents for construction, disclosure and interested parties, which is the ethics form. Those are only needed now with it's over $1 million. So it's not as much anymore. We have the WV-96, of course, and purchasing division obtains the bonds insurance if applicable. Change orders, the only thing you will need for those is your pre-approvals. You verify that the vendor is still in good standing. A signed and dated letter from the vendor along with a price quote or a quote that says that they are agreeing with the same terms and conditions from the last beginning of the contract. We had to verify the contractor's license and insurance, including a bond writer and agency justification letter, which you can do an agency justification letter and a letter from the vendor in the same on the same form. Just got to make sure that the vendor signs the letter after you, and you don't sign until after the vendor signs. And we also need a purchasing affidavit for a renewal for a change order. With the direct award, you need to make sure we have a price quote that the vendor has signed and master terms and conditions as well. Written justification, which the WV-96 would have your justification, your pre-approvals. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the 96, 65. Did it again. Then it's advertised in the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin for 10 days. If no vendors respond, then the agency would, the state would go ahead, purchasing will go ahead and do the award. We'll make sure that they are in good standing with everybody. These are good checklists to keep in your file, and that way you can make sure that you have everything in order and makes it go quicker. The central delivery order, pre-approvals of, if needed, all the appropriate contract information, which sometimes includes the pricing page that is attached to the contract. Make sure the vendor is registered, which it should be. And in your file, you need to make sure you keep a copy of the Secretary of State's. With emergencies, you need to make sure you have to obtain written justification for the emergency purchase, and it needs to be approved by the purchasing director, which can be done through email. Pre-approvals when applicable. Try to get 3 bids or explanations of efforts to try to attain their 3 bids. And the terms and conditions need to be signed, master terms and conditions. A signed and dated quote. Purchasing affidavit. Vendor has to be registered with the purchasing division. They have to be in good standing with Secretary of State, Insurance Commission, Department, and Workers' Comp. We'll need a non-conflict of interest and disclosure of interested parties if applicable, and then 96 if applicable. And the emergency procedures are emergency purchase. We're supposed to receive those within 30 days of the date requested. Try to remember that as well. Expressions for interest for less than 250,000. Of course, you need the pre-approvals, the memorandum or letter providing description, list of firms contacted and firms selected, and master terms and conditions. Verification of vendor properly registered, and then make sure they're good standing with OASIS, with Secretary of State's, Insurance Commission, and federal and state department and workers' comp. The agency contract negotiated with successful firm. So you send it to your buyer with the AIA documents and or negotiated agreement as applicable and inclusion of the terms and conditions. You still have the non-conflict of interest, the purchasing affidavit, the insurance, which would include the professional liability, disclosure of interested parties if applicable, and the 96 if applicable. Then the expression of interest for over 250. You would submit the standard EOI format template complete, inclusive of the evaluations point criteria, master terms and conditions, the list of evaluation committee members, and pre-approval if needed for the Attorney General's OT, Capitol Building Commission, surplus property, and then it goes out to the bid process. Your mandatory pre-bid attendees list, if you're going to have a mandatory pre-bid list. And of course, we have the questions and answer period for the addendums. You have the award process, the money to the non-conflict signed by the members and advisors, evaluations signed by all committee members, and then it comes to purchasing, and you'd have the negotiation with the highest scoring firm. You'll have purchasing approval for the agency to negotiate with the highest scoring firm. Agencies submit the contract with a successful firm for processing by the state agent, by purchasing. And then the other things are just as usual for the verification of the vendors properly registered and good standing with OASIS and good standing with Secretary of State and other forms. We have a request for a proposal. We had to have the agency has to give us a written request to use the RFP process. Agency would submit the CRQS or the CRQM, a list of evaluation committee members, which only the agency procurement officer has to do that. It has to do the certification for the evaluation for an RFP. Yeah, the bid process, and that's in there. If there's a mandatory pre-bid meeting, you'd have a list for that. You have the addendums, and then the RFP evaluation committee member training certificate is only required for the agency procurement officer. The technical evaluation is signed off by the committee members, including the procurement officer, and the purchasing division approves the technical evaluation and establishes the cost bid opening. The cost bid opening is done at the same time as a pre-bid meeting, our bid opening with regular purchasing bids. You have the second OT approval if applicable. And you have verification for the, make sure the vendor is properly registered with purchasing, OASIS, Insurance Commission, Federal and State Department, and the good standing with the Secretary of State. And you have non-conflict of interest again, and the 96 if applicable, and Bromson Insurance if applicable. Thank you for participating in my
We do have a question. This is an OASIS question. In OASIS regarding the free-form vendors list, should the address information still be entered in relation to the suggested vendor list?
I would say yes, just to make sure that we have them as well, but at the bottom of the page, ask, how do you want this vendor to be notified? Choose email, because we do not send out hard copies anymore.
But it doesn't look like anybody has any other questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks, everybody, for participating, and have a great rest of the day.